Once upon a time, in a beautiful kingdom surrounded by green valleys and singing birds, there lived a kind and gentle girl named Cinderella. She had a pure heart, full of love and kindness. After her mother passed away, her father married a proud and selfish woman who had two equally spoiled daughters. At first, they pretended to be kind, but after Cinderella's father died, everything changed. Her stepmother and stepsisters turned her into a servant in her own house. From morning till night, she worked hard, cleaning the floors, washing dishes, cooking meals, and mending clothes. Her soft hands became rough, and her lovely face was always covered with ashes from the fireplace, which is why everyone started calling her Cinderella. Despite all the cruelty, Cinderella never complained. Her heart was full of hope, and every night she dreamed that one day happiness would return to her life. She often sat by the window talking to the birds and mice who were her only friends. They listened to her stories and cheered her up with their little squeaks and songs. One bright morning, a royal messenger arrived in the village with exciting news. The king had decided to hold a grand ball at the royal palace in honor of his son, Prince Charming. Every young woman in the kingdom was invited, for the prince would choose his bride that very night. When the message reached Cinderella's home, her stepsisters screamed with joy. They rushed to their rooms trying on dresses and jewelry. Cinderella helped them get ready, fixing their gowns and combing their hair, even though her heart felt heavy. She wished she could go too, but her stepmother only laughed at her dream. "You? Go to the royal ball? Look at your rags, girl. You don't belong there," she said cruelly. When the night of the ball arrived, the house was full of noise and excitement. The stepsisters left in a golden carriage, laughing and talking about how they would impress the prince. Cinderella stood at the door and watched them leave. When the house became quiet again, she sat near the fireplace and cried. Her tears fell upon the ashes, and she whispered, "I wish I could go too. Just once." Suddenly, the room filled with a warm golden light. Cinderella looked up, and there stood a beautiful woman with a glowing wand in her hand. "Don't be afraid, my child," said the woman kindly. "I am your fairy godmother, and you shall go to the ball tonight." With a gentle wave of her wand, magic sparkled through the air. The old torn dress that Cinderella wore turned into a breathtaking gown of silver and blue. Her shoes became delicate glass slippers that shimmered like stars. Outside, a pumpkin transformed into a shining golden carriage, and 6 little mice became fine white horses ready to take her to the palace. Cinderella was speechless with joy. The fairy godmother smiled and said softly, "But remember, my dear, this magic will only last until midnight. When the clock strikes 12, everything will return to the way it was." Cinderella promised to remember, thanked her fairy godmother, and rode away to the royal palace, her heart fluttering with excitement. When she entered the grand ballroom, everyone stopped to stare. The musicians paused, the candles glowed brighter, and even the prince himself could not take his eyes off her. Cinderella looked like a dream, graceful, kind, and full of charm. The prince walked up to her and asked for a dance. They danced the whole night, smiling and talking as if they had known each other forever. The stepsisters were jealous, but did not recognize that the beautiful princess was their own Cinderella. But suddenly, the great clock began to strike 12. "Oh no!" cried Cinderella, remembering the fairy godmother's warning. She quickly ran out of the palace, her gown sparkling as she fled down the marble stairs. In her hurry, one of her glass slippers slipped off her foot, but she didn't stop to pick it up. She jumped into her carriage, and before the prince could reach her, the magic ended. The carriage turned back into a pumpkin, the horses became mice again, and Cinderella found herself standing in her old torn dress, holding one glass slipper in her hand. The next day, the whole kingdom was talking about the mysterious girl from the ball. The prince declared that he would marry no one else but her. He sent his men across the land with the lost glass slipper, saying, "The girl whose foot fits this slipper will be my bride." They went from house to house. Every young woman tried to fit her foot into the slipper, but it was either too small or too big. When they reached Cinderella's home, her stepsisters eagerly tried to force their feet into the delicate shoe, but it was no use. Finally, the prince noticed Cinderella standing quietly in the corner. The stepmother laughed. "She's just a servant, Your Highness. She wasn't at the ball." But the prince insisted. Cinderella gently sat down and tried on the slipper, and to everyone's surprise, it fit perfectly. At that very moment, her fairy godmother appeared again, waving her wand. Cinderella's rags turned back into her shining gown, and the whole room gasped. The prince knew at once that she was the girl he had danced with. Overjoyed, he took her hand and asked her to be his princess. Soon after, a grand wedding was held at the royal palace. Cinderella forgave her stepmother and stepsisters for their cruelty, showing the same kindness that had always lived in her heart. She and the prince lived happily ever after, spreading love and goodness throughout the kingdom. And whenever the stars sparkled at night, the fairy godmother smiled from above, proud of the girl who had never stopped believing in her dreams.